The quiet town of Meadowbrook had never felt so cold. It wasn't the biting chill of the winter air, but the emptiness that hung over everything. The streets, once bustling with the sounds of neighbors catching up and children playing, were now eerily still. The town hadn't changed much, but Daniel Harper was about to find that everything he had known was different. His boots hit the cracked pavement with a rhythmic, determined echo as he stepped off the bus. The military had brought him back home after 2 long years in the heat of battle, far from the small town he grew up in. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, taking in the familiar sights, the old diner, the gas station that never seemed to close, and the small park where he used to spend hours with Sarah and their little girl Emma. This was the homecoming he had dreamed of, the embrace of his wife, Sarah, the laughter of his daughter, Emma, as she ran into his arms. He could almost hear their voices in his mind, filling him with warmth. But something felt off. He looked up at his house, the one that had always been a beacon of safety and love. The porch light, the one Sarah always left on for him when he came home late, was off. The windows, once filled with the soft glow of light in the evenings, were dark. He frowned, his heart thumping in his chest. He reached for his keys, but the door was unlocked. With a tentative breath, he stepped inside. The familiar scent of Sarah's lavender-scented candles was gone. "Sarah, Emma," his voice echoed in the empty house. The living room was empty, save for the dust settling on the furniture, untouched for what felt like years. The photographs of their family, once proudly displayed on the walls, had disappeared. He moved through the rooms, checking each one, his pulse quickening with each empty space he encountered. The silence grew louder, and the house that once represented love and joy now felt like a tomb. His family was gone. Daniel Harper had been just another small-town boy when he enlisted in the Army, seeking purpose and adventure beyond the confines of Meadowbrook. His love for Sarah had been the foundation of his every decision, and when they married right out of high school, it was a promise that life would always be better together. Sarah was his best friend, his confidant. Their life was simple but filled with laughter and dreams. He remembered the days when they would sit on the porch, talking about their hopes for the future, building a family, growing old together. They had a daughter, Emma, and she was everything they had ever wanted. Bright-eyed and filled with wonder, she was the glue that held their world together. But when Daniel's name was called to serve, he left behind everything. He promised Sarah that he would return, but life in the military was unpredictable. Letters from home were sparse, and the time spent apart only grew more challenging with each passing day. He watched from afar as his family's world continued without him. He missed Emma's first words, her first steps, her first day of school, and it pained him to know that Sarah was carrying the weight of it all. Yet, he trusted that they would make it through. She always assured him that everything was fine, but his heart ached with guilt for not being there. The letters slowed down, then stopped altogether. At first, he attributed it to the stress of raising a child alone, juggling work, bills, and everything else life threw at her. But as months turned to years, the quiet grew louder. Was it just the distance, or had something more insidious been happening? Now, standing in the empty house, Daniel felt the weight of those unspoken words, the years of separation, and the creeping sense of fear that something was terribly wrong. Daniel knew he had to act. He couldn't just stand here and hope for answers to come to him. He reached for his phone, dialing Sarah's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic settled in, and he quickly tried calling her parents, friends, anyone who might know where she had gone. But no one answered. The silence was suffocating. The following morning, after an agonizing night of sleepless pacing, Daniel went to the police station, hoping for answers. Officer Bennett, a kind-hearted man in his late 50s, listened to Daniel's story with a furrowed brow. "Mr. Harper, how long has it been since you've heard from your wife?" Officer Bennett asked gently. 6 months, Daniel replied, his voice breaking. "She stopped answering my letters. I thought it was just the stress. But now this." Bennett nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Have you spoken to her family? Or maybe some of your mutual friends?" "I've tried. No one's seen her. No one's heard from her." "Have you tried calling her work? Maybe someone there knows something." Daniel shook his head. She was a teacher, but her school records don't show anything after the previous year. It's like she just vanished. The officer looked down at his desk, clearly troubled. I'll get the word out to the other officers, but you may want to start asking around. People might know something you don't. And so, Daniel began his search. He went door to door, visiting neighbors, searching for any clues that would lead him to Sarah and Emma. It wasn't until he spoke with Mrs. Clark, an elderly neighbor, that he learned something startling. Now that you mention it, Mrs. Clark said, squinting at him through her glasses. I remember a moving truck one morning, and there was a man with Sarah. Not you, though. The words hit Daniel like a thunderclap. A man? Who was this man? Why hadn't Sarah told him about him? Determined to find the truth, Daniel hired a private investigator, Mr. Andrews, to trace Sarah's movements. Andrews was a no-nonsense investigator, experienced in finding missing persons and uncovering hidden secrets. Weeks passed in agonizing silence until one day, Andrews called with a lead. Daniel, I found her. She's living in a small town about 200 miles away. Relief surged through Daniel's chest. But then Andrews added, and she's remarried. The words hit like a blow to his chest. Remarried? To who? Daniel's mind raced. Filled with questions and fears, he didn't know how to answer. When Daniel arrived at the new address, he stood frozen in front of the house, the world around him spinning. He had built up this moment in his mind for so long, and now it seemed like his whole world was falling apart. He knocked on the door, his fists trembling. Sarah answered, her face pale. Her eyes were filled with tears as she saw him, standing there. Daniel, she whispered, her voice filled with guilt. Sarah, he said, his voice tight. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you wait for me? Sarah stepped back, ushering him inside. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. But when you left, the military stopped sending your paychecks. The house was repossessed. I couldn't keep up. I didn't know what to do. So I reached out to the military for help. But they couldn't find you. I thought you were gone. I thought you had been killed. Daniel's heart broke as she continued, explaining the turmoil she had faced in his absence. She had tried everything she could to hold things together for Emma, but the pressure had broken her. I couldn't wait anymore, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I couldn't afford to keep our lives together. So, I found someone who could help. Someone who could offer Emma stability. I never stopped loving you, Daniel. But I had to do what was best for our daughter. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. I'm here now, Sarah. I never left. The revelation shook Daniel to his core. He was angry, hurt, and confused. But as he stood there, looking at Sarah, and then at Emma, his daughter, the little girl he had missed so much, the anger faded. Emma's face lit up when she saw him, though she seemed unsure at first, as if struggling to remember the man who once was everything to her. Daddy, Emma said hesitantly. Daniel knelt down, opening his arms. It's me, sweetie. It's Daddy. She ran into his arms, and for the first time in 2 years, Daniel felt whole again. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he had time. He had the rest of his life to prove to Emma and Sarah that he was back, and that he was not going anywhere again. With the help of Sarah and her new husband, Daniel began to rebuild his relationship with Emma. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. They agreed that Emma would spend time with both her parents, and Daniel would be involved in her life again. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer controlled them. Daniel also worked with a veteran support organization, using his voice to fight for the rights of families who faced similar struggles. He found a renewed sense of purpose, using his experiences to advocate for better systems that would support families like his. In the end, Daniel learned that family wasn't about the mistakes or the things that went wrong. It was about love and resilience. And with that, he moved forward, ready to create a future filled with hope. If Daniel's story touched your heart, imagine how many others face similar challenges. Share this video to spread awareness about the struggles that veterans and their families endure. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more powerful stories about resilience, redemption, and hope. Together, we can make a difference.